Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. I'm your host, Marcus Udikang. It's the show where, we chat with business analysts and project managers about their challenges and triumphs, their ideas, and of course, their contribution to their field. It's inspiring, it's upbeat, it's exciting, but of course, most of all, I think it's inquisitive. My guest today has a background in Agile and project management. He is a trainer, a coach, a speaker, and is essentially what he refers to as dedicated to dispelling the fog surrounding project management and Agile. He's recently written a book entitled Easy in Theory, Difficult in Practice, 100 Lessons in Leadership, which we'll talk to him a bit about today. So please help me welcome to today's show, Kiron Bondale. Welcome, Kiron.
Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate being here.
Thank you very much for coming. So I've got a number of questions for you today. First off, let's talk a bit about your history in project management. So we'd like to know how did you get started in project management?
Absolutely. So, like many folks that get into this profession, I didn't start off in high school, university saying, I want to be a project manager. Coincidentally, my father was a project manager, worked in the civil engineering, structural engineering world for pretty much his entire career. But I didn't really know what he did, and I wasn't particularly interested in what he did. When I graduated from university, I started a job, as many do, in their specific domain, happened to be in the systems management, technology systems management domain. Worked in that for 3 or 4 years, joined a consulting company. And when I joined the consulting company, I started to work on client engagements. And after doing that for a few years, my manager saw something in me that said, I need to expose this individual to project management. Whether it's going to stick or not doesn't matter. I want them to learn a little bit about it. And I'm very thankful that he sent me on this soft skills course down in New Orleans, as it turns out, which is a great place to go for a soft skills course. And I had the chance to learn about things like stakeholder engagement, effective communications, conflict resolution, negotiation, but also about what does a project manager do. And after taking that course, the light bulb kind of went off in my head, and I said, let's put aside this being a techno geek and getting my hands dirty every day. I'd like to lead projects and kind of make the whole greater than the sum of the parts.
That's fascinating. I think it's always great when someone sees something in you and is willing to give you a chance, an opportunity to train like that. It's the best way to grow. And just to add on to your point about coming out of a field that wasn't project management related, can you make it as a PM in a completely different domain than what your background is in?
Absolutely, it's possible, but it is very challenging. And one example of that is PMI a few years ago changed their PDU collection process to require you to align with the talent triangle. And one of the legs of the talent triangle is business domain knowledge or expertise. And I think that was done to recognize the fact that while somebody could be exceptionally good at the hard skills and the soft skills of the profession, they could build the world's greatest schedule, they can negotiate it very effectively with stakeholders. But if they don't know something about the domain they're working in, enough to at least ask the right questions, it's going to work against them. And some of the ways that it can work against them are, first of all, their client may just not build any credibility or feel that they are a credible project manager. Secondly, their team members may not have a lot of respect for them right out of the gates. It'll take them that much longer to earn respect. But I also feel that they introduce risk into a project, delivery risk, because by not being able to ask the right kinds of questions, they won't know what they won't know. So if we think about uncertainty like a pie, and our goal as project managers is try to reduce that wedge of unknown unknowns as much as possible. When you're not having domain expertise, it's very difficult to squeeze that portion of the pie and have much more being your known unknowns. But there are ways to overcome it. You could take a course. You could find a seasoned PM that's in the profession that you, or in the domain that you want to work in, and have them mentor you, have them provide a bunch of support to you. There's tons of information available online. You could soak that up. Job shadow a PM that's operating in that role as well. Volunteer if necessary. But at the end of the day, it is going to be about a hiring manager or a functional manager or a sponsor being willing to take that leap of faith with you. And that's why I think the best advice I can give around this is, rather than try to make a career switch to a different industry in a new company, If you've established a great track record within the company that you belong to, try and do the lateral switch there. Now, of course, that's challenging if you're working in a small company that only does one thing. But if you're working in a much larger organization, there might be those types of opportunities available to move from technology to construction or construction to process engineering, all within the same company. And because you have the organization awareness and you've built up that credibility within the organization, people are more likely to give you a fair shake.
That sounds like, I remember when I worked at IBM years ago, I had heard that someone was retiring after 40 years. And that guy had worked his way up. He'd worked his way up, different departments over time, became, I don't know what he started as, but I think he retired as a project manager. So just to parallel to your point, it's that growth within that company, either lateral or vertically. So, which actually brings me to the idea of, does one have psychological safety when they do this transition? So don't, as you say, don't blame corporate culture on psychological safety. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, for sure. So the article I had written was something that I had run into many times when speaking to people about psychological safety. I would give a presentation on the topic, and invariably, one or two people in the audience would ask, well, I want to promote psychological safety within my team, but there's forces outside of my team, organizational challenges, management dysfunctions, a toxic culture that prevents me from building psychological safety within my team. I agree with that to a certain extent. We do want our senior leadership to take a stand and to kind of bake psychological safety into the core values of the organization. We also want them to be modeling the behavior that we're expecting everyone in the organization is following as far as safety is concerned. But if we just sit back and wait for that to happen, it might take years and it may never happen at all. I think it's really important that all of us views ourselves as leaders. We are in an opportunity to be able to at least build a safe working space in the confines of our team. And what that might mean is that you, as the leader, might need to act as the buffer or the shield to your team members. Keep them safe so that they can stay focused on their work. They can experiment, take chances, be authentic, be vulnerable, but you're going to act as that safety net that might separate them from the functional managers or other stakeholders outside of the team who may be operating in an unsafe manner or might be reducing or eroding safety within the team. So I think it's absolutely a cop-out for anyone to say, I'd like to distill psychological safety, but I can't do it because of stuff that's outside of my sphere of control or sphere of influence. In that case, you're not being a leader.
In the confines and the context of that organization, yes, I think being a leader, being a project manager, and creating those buffers is so important. And that's how you get things done, right? That's how you get things done. So 7 deadly project manager sins you talk about in your book. Let's talk about a few of those. Can you discuss that?
Yeah, a couple of the ones that I would touch on. One is neglecting stakeholders. It's very easy, especially for people that are new to project management, to focus on the ones that are the loudest, the stakeholders that are the loudest. It's that old expression about the squeaky wheel gets greased. In terms of project management, it means we're going to give those stakeholders a lot more face time. We're going to engage with them a lot more. We're going to try to keep them happy. But what I've found over my career is that rarely is it the stakeholder that's jumping up and down in your face that's the one you really need to be worried about, because most of the time everyone's aware of their problems already and the team's probably already doing what they need to do to keep that stakeholder happy or at least kind of calm them down. It's the ones that are quiet, that maybe are unwilling to directly come to you and say, hey, we've got a problem. Those are the ones I watch out for. The silent stakeholders are the ones that when you're not looking, they're going to reach around behind you and stab you in the back, or they're going to go and talk to your manager or to your sponsor and say, I think we need to remove this project manager from this project. Those are the ones that you need to keep an eye on. So when you've done your stakeholder analysis, if you've determined that a particular stakeholder is a key stakeholder, they have significant potential influence or impact over your project, and for one reason or another, they're being really quiet, that should be sending an alarm bell off. You should be kind of putting a reminder in your calendar on a semi-regular basis. I need to reach out and kind of have a conversation with that individual or that stakeholder group just to understand, take a pulse reading, see how they're doing. Is there something that we are doing that is turning them off or annoying them? How could we treat them in a more fair manner? So that's one of the lessons I would share. The other one is, and this is again a lesson that I saw, I learned the hard way myself, but I've seen it in others, junior project managers, is you learn about the iron triangle or the triple constraint when you take a project management course. Scope, schedule, cost, all important, no question. But what often happens, I've seen, is that project managers will obsess over the triple constraint. They will try to do whatever they can to make sure they're on time, on budget, delivering scope, which is good. We want project managers that are trying to respect baselines. But we got to remember, no one invests in a project just to hit a date or just to hit a cost value or just to get a bunch of deliverables. They're trying to get business outcomes. They're trying to get some benefits. And if we take our eye off the benefits ball and we just focus on scope, schedule, and cost, we may not end up solving the problem that our customer had paid us to solve. And so that's why it's important. Be aware of the triple constraint, keep it in mind, but don't put the blinders on and forget that there's business outcomes that we are trying to achieve. And the triple constraint is merely a means to an end to achieving those.
Interesting you mentioned that. I was just reading the other day about product owners, not to get off topic, but product owners can negotiate on your scope and time. You can't do that as a PM. That's it. You're stuck, like you said, within that triple constraint. So yeah, it's just the way it is, which anyway, that's Agile. It's a different story altogether. But
I would say, I mean, that's a good point that you raise. Oftentimes, as project managers, we may be handed one or more constraints of the iron triangle. Worst case, we're handed all three of them. Usually when we're handed all three, my recommendation is run away. But if you're handed two out of the three, and those two out of the three are cast in stone, it's still important as a project manager that if you deeply understand the business case underlying your project, and you come to the realization at some point over the life of the project that that business case is no longer viable, it is really your ethical responsibility to raise that to the powers that be, to your sponsor, to your customer, make them aware of it so that they're not just continuing to throw good money after bad.
yeah, well, if you're large in charge, if you're large and in charge, then you have that authority or legitimacy to do so, like you said, and it should be done for sure. Self-managing teams. A self-managing team does not mean no rules, you say. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, there's this holy cow, sacred cow, whatever you want to call it in Agile, which is about self-organizing teams. The team is the lowest level of granularity in an Agile context. The team is the rulers. They decide what they're going to do. We need to remember what the context of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development was. It was looking at people that were highly skilled, that were disciplined, that were well-trained, where you could enable them to self-organize, and they would do so in a responsible manner. However, in most organizations, when we're forming new teams, and we have people coming from different functional areas, some of whom might be used to an adaptive way of delivering, others that are not, you can't just say, here you go, figure it out for yourself, and hope that they're going to deliver the business results without having challenges. So we want them to figure out their ways of working. We want to give them the empowerment to figure out the how. But like everything else, trust but verify. We want to make sure, do they have the necessary skills? Do they have the credibility to be able to self-organize? And do they understand the guardrails that are in place within our enterprises, the standards, the policies, which cannot be broken? If they understand those limitations, those constraints, and can operate responsibly within those, then absolutely self-organizing is the way to go. And so that's why I really like the statement from Disciplined Agile, which is we want to build semi-autonomous self-organizing teams. So they are self-organizing, but we're only giving them as much autonomy as makes sense in the given context that we're facing.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. You have a set of rules. You're working within that context of those rules. You're not just going willy-nilly on your own drive down down the beach, so to speak, or whatever it is. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, and it's a
Yeah.
great example of Deming's statement about if you choose to optimize a part, you could end up sub-optimizing the whole.
Yeah.
If we think about a team that's in a mid to large sized organization, they are a component, they're a part of a much larger ecosystem. They're part of a complex adaptive system. And if they choose to come up with a way of working that runs counter to the policies and standards and the workflow of other teams, they're actually going to create more trouble than the value that they're delivering. And so we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that when we take this self-organizing approach, we're doing it in a way that's responsible, disciplined, and that can scale.
Yeah. You're only as strong as your weakest link.
Absolutely.
All got to tie together. Your book. Let's talk a bit about your book. Anything you want to say about your book?
Sure, I like to consider it a field guide for project managers at any level of seniority or experience. There's lessons in there that are appropriate for someone that's just starting on the profession, but there's also lessons in there for people that are seasoned veterans of the field. And you could certainly sit down and read it cover to cover. I mean, there's 100 lessons there. Each lesson is no more than 500 words. You can keep it at your bedstand and read a couple of articles a night and get through it, just over a month. But I find a more powerful way to read it is to familiarize yourself with the structure, with the different sections. And then as you're actually managing projects and you're running into challenges, consult the book. Look, is there an article within it that might be relevant to the challenge that I'm facing? And review that article at that point. So it could be both used as a one and done read, but it could also be used as that field guide for project managers.
Now, what I saw one of your posts, because I follow your posts on LinkedIn, and I saw one of your posts that talked about the history, or should I say, how you came about writing this book. Did you want
Yeah,
to?
absolutely. It's kind of a bit of an interesting story. I mean, back in 2009, I was working for a company and we needed to promote our brand. And I had been doing presentations, webinars, giving talks for a while for the company, but I'd never done any writing. And my manager encouraged me to start writing a blog. And so I started doing that. And initially, I had a ton of ideas. And so I was putting out articles fairly frequently. But then I got into the cadence of let's do this on a weekly basis. Well, that was 2009, and I've been doing it weekly since then. A couple of years into doing that, my father and I were chatting, and he challenged me. He said, this blogging you're doing, that's child's play. That's an amateurish kind of thing. Why don't you write a book? If you want to do something that people are going to remember, you got to write a book. And I'm aware of my own limitations. The concept of sitting down and writing a 200, 300 page book cover to cover just was too daunting. I kind of said, yeah, I'm not going to get to that. And beyond that, I sort of said, I don't really see the benefit to myself. Well, fast forward now to late 2020, the middle of the pandemic, I am finding myself with some free time on my hands. And I've also written close to 800 articles over the previous 10 plus years. I looked at those articles and I said, there's more than enough content here for a book, a compilation. And so I took some time over the Christmas holidays last year and I curated what I consider to be 100 of the better articles. I'll never say they're the best articles because that's to my readers to decide, but they're ones that I myself sitting back would say, yeah, I had something worthwhile to say there. So I picked 100 of those and then I did the hard work of trying to figure out what kind of themes do they align with and did some general editing, organized them into sections, got in touch with a self-publishing company and published it end to end. The process took a couple of months, and now I can say, yeah, I've got a book I can hold up here. It's not gonna make me a ton of money, but it's there for me to share my ideas with the broader world beyond those that read my blog. And it's something that, I mean, if we think about the term legacy, it sounds cliche, it sounds trite, but a book is something that will live beyond you. And that's something that nobody can take away.
That's amazing. That's fascinating. I did buy a copy, by the way, in case you're interested.
Thank you. I
Yeah, you're
appreciate it.
welcome. Yeah, you're welcome. So let's talk about risk a bit, or let's talk a bit about risk rather. You say to make assumptions analysis a routine flu shot for your project. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. A flu shot is something that we do maybe once a year to inoculate ourselves, to protect ourselves from either catching the flu or having a really bad side effects if we happen to get the flu. And if we think about risk, risk is uncertainty that matters, to quote Dr. David Hilson. Catching the flu is a risk. You might have a risk of catching it. One of the ways that we can reduce the risks on our project is to look at our assumptions and regularly review the assumptions that our team members and other stakeholders have made. Because if we think about an assumption is an unvalidated perspective or decision. Because it's unvalidated, it represents uncertainty. If we turn that assumption around and if it's invalidated, we now have got a risk that could be realized. And so I always feel that it's a good idea on a regular basis to review the assumptions that the team has made, especially if we're following a predictive approach during the planning stages of your project. Tons of assumptions will be made. Kind of put a timer on each one of those assumptions. When are we going to go back and review that assumption to see is it still valid or not? By doing that, by having that discipline, you could avoid being surprised when one of those assumptions ends up being proven invalid and ends up creating an impact to your project.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Actually, you were talking about risk, and I thought, you know what? Having that person who's in a meeting and sits down and is the quiet one, that could be a risk too.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, because they might be the smartest person in the room. They might have that idea that might help the project move forward, or they might be the devil's advocate, that they're sitting there thinking there's a fatal flaw in this scope or in this solution approach. And if they stay quiet, we're not getting that benefit from them. And that is a risk. And that's why, again, good leaders are going to draw out information from the team members. If there's a team member that you would expect to contribute and that doesn't, maybe it's important to follow up with them after the meeting to say, hey, noticed you were quiet. Is something on your mind? Can we chat about it? That kind of a thing. That first starts to build those bridges, build those connections with your team. But secondly, it's a great way of being able to draw out the people in the group that might be a little bit quieter, especially if they feel somewhat, if they have some lack of confidence or concern about speaking up in a larger team setting.
I read a book called Meetings Suck by Cameron Herold, a Canadian who went to Carleton University of all. And he has this, anyway, it's all about meetings and how you structure your meetings. He said the first thing you do when you get into a meeting, the people who are quiet and who you know are quiet, have them speak first. Have them speak first and get it out, done and over with. Don't have them wait until the end.
I would say that strategy might work, but I would be very careful with that. You got to kind of know your audience. If you've got someone that is both an externally evidencing introvert and extremely kind of far on the introversion scale, by doing something like that, by putting them on the spot that way, if they don't feel safe, you might actually get them to clam up even more. They might feel very unsafe. They may completely disengage from the team. So you really got to know your audience if you're going to use a strategy like that. I tend to be one of those hit people over the head with a 2x4 if it'll get the result I want. But I've been burnt a few times in my career where I used that strategy with somebody that really would have preferred just a one-on-one conversation offline.
Yeah, there's a time and place for everything. Know your audience, like you said. And talking about an audience, if anyone in our audience wants to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Sure, a couple of ways to do that. I'm available on LinkedIn. You can search for Kiron Bondale, or you can visit my blog, which is kbondale.wordpress.com. So those are probably the two easiest ways to locate me.
Fantastic. And can we have one more look at your book?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. Yes.
And it's available in all the usual channels, Amazon, Chapters, Barnes & Noble, pretty much wherever you could buy a book online these days, you should be able to locate mine.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Karen. This has been a fabulous conversation, a lot of repartee back and forth, and I love it. Just fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Marcus.
You're welcome. All right. Have yourself a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay. Bye.